Get out of here. You don't belong here. You're not worthy to sit among us." The words tore through the air like shattered glass, each syllable coated with venom. For a moment, time seemed to stop inside the diner. Forks froze halfway to mouths. The hiss of the coffee machine continued in the background, but no one moved to pour a cup. Conversations died in an instant, strangled by the cruelty in that single sentence. At the center of it all sat an elderly black man. His back was straight, his shoulders squared, and his hands rested gently on the table. He wasn't just any old man. He was a veteran. His presence carried the invisible weight of decades spent serving a country that had asked everything of him and given little in return. His face bore the lines of time, deep grooves carved by hardship, by sacrifice, by memory. His hair was white and cropped short, his cane leaning against the booth beside him. He had come for nothing more than a quiet breakfast. But dignity often finds itself under attack in the most ordinary places. And then came the sound. The slap. It landed like thunder, reverberating off the walls. Plates rattled on tabletops. Glasses quivered. The bully's hand had struck hard across the veteran's face. But what cracked louder than skin against skin was the silence that followed. The bully stood over him, broad shoulders beneath a black leather jacket. His jaw clenched, eyes narrowed into slits of arrogant triumph. He sneered, enjoying the spectacle he had created. "What now, old man? Where's your army now? Where are your medals? Your parades? All that honor, does it feed you today? Does it protect you here?" The veteran didn't move. His jaw tightened, but he did not raise his hand in return. He did not shout. He did not beg. He simply turned his face back toward the table, as if drawing from a strength no one else in the room could see. Every pair of eyes in that diner turned toward the scene. At a booth near the door, two young men in their 20s stiffened, fists tightening beneath the table. One whispered, "We should say something," but neither stood. Fear bound them tighter than any rope. Across the aisle, a mother pulled her little girl closer, covering her daughter's eyes. The child squirmed, whispering, "Why is he so mean, Mommy?" But her mother hushed her quickly, voice trembling with unease. Behind the counter, the waitress clutched a steaming coffee pot in both hands. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She glanced toward the manager, who stood frozen near the register. His eyes said what his lips dared not: "Don't get involved." But the silence in that room wasn't agreement. It was paralysis. Every person watching knew what had just happened was wrong, deeply wrong. But when cruelty rises, courage often hides. The bully leaned closer, pressing his weight into the booth. He slammed his hand down on the table, making silverware rattle and a nearby glass tip dangerously close to spilling. "Say something," he barked. "Defend yourself, you worthless old man. Where's your pride now? Where's your country now?" His voice rang louder, feeding off the stillness, twisting it into fuel. He expected resistance, he expected fear, he expected begging. But what he got instead unsettled him. The veteran finally lifted his eyes. They were not the eyes of a broken man. They were not the eyes of someone beaten. They were heavy with something else entirely: sorrow. Sorrow for a world where heroes sat unrecognized. Sorrow for a generation that believed cruelty made them powerful. Sorrow that the country he had once bled for had produced men like the one now standing over him. For a flicker of a second, the bully felt it. Shame. His throat tightened, his stomach clenched. But pride is a prison, and he quickly buried that feeling beneath another laugh, louder, harsher than before. "See that? He's nothing. He's too weak to even defend himself. And you all—" He gestured to the room, his hand sweeping over the frozen diners. "You all sit and watch, because deep down you know I'm right." But the bully did not know. He did not know that the man before him had once stood in jungles where the air reeked of blood and smoke. He did not know that those hands, now resting gently on the table, had once carried brothers in arms across muddy fields under fire. He did not know about the medals tucked away in a drawer at home. Medals the veteran never showed, because he believed true honor didn't need display. He did not know that this man had walked battlefields where fear was constant, where death lurked in every shadow, and yet still returned home with dignity intact. And here, in this quiet diner, All of that courage, all of that sacrifice, was being mocked by a man who had never risked more than his pride. The bully's laughter echoed, but it rang hollow. The crowd remained silent, but the silence was suffocating. One of the young men at the booth near the door rose slightly, only to sit again when his friend grabbed his arm. The waitress placed the coffee pot back on the counter with trembling hands. A man at the far end of the diner whispered, "This isn't right." But the words never left his table. Everyone waited, for someone, anyone, to break the tension. The veteran remained still. His silence was louder than the bully's taunts, because sometimes the refusal to bend speaks more than any words could. Every second stretched, long and unbearable. The slap still echoed in their minds. But so did something else. Anticipation. The people in that diner didn't know it yet, but this moment would live far beyond the walls of that small-town restaurant. It would be told as a story of arrogance versus dignity, of cruelty meeting silence, of history colliding with ignorance. But for now, they could only sit in the thick air of shame, waiting for the next move. And now I ask you, what would you have done in that diner? Would you have stood up, fists clenched, voice raised, ready to defend the man who once defended you? Or would you have stayed seated like everyone else, waiting for someone braver to act first? Because silence, my friend, is louder than violence. And when good people do nothing, cruelty always believes it has won. Tell me in the comments below, would you have spoken up or stayed silent like the crowd in that diner? Your answer says more about you than you think. The diner was still. That kind of stillness that doesn't happen naturally. It wasn't the quiet of a morning lull, nor the hush of people simply enjoying their meals. This silence was heavy, like a thick blanket thrown over every voice, every sound, smothering them into submission. The slap still hung in the air, even minutes later. Every person could hear it replaying in their minds, echoing louder than the clatter of dishes or the hum of the ceiling fans. The bully stood tall, chest puffed out like a rooster on parade, convinced that his display of dominance had been complete. He looked around at the room with a smirk, daring someone, anyone, to challenge him. But no one moved. Behind the counter, the waitress clutched a notepad in trembling hands. Her eyes darted back and forth between the veteran and the bully, then toward the register where her manager stood. He gave a barely perceptible shake of his head, his lips pressed tight, her heart pounded. Every part of her wanted to scream, "Stop it! Leave him alone!" But fear tangled around her throat like a noose. What if the bully turned on her? What if she lost her job? What if this escalated into something none of them could control? She looked down at her apron, stained with coffee splashes from years of service. She had seen fights in this diner before, drunks arguing, couples screaming, but never something like this. Never something that cut so deeply, that twisted the air itself into shame. At a booth near the entrance, two young men whispered fiercely. "We can't just sit here," one said. His fists balled so tight his knuckles turned white. "And do what?" the other shot back. "Pick a fight with a guy twice our size? You saw how hard he hit him. What if he's armed?" The first shook his head, frustrated. His father had raised him to believe in standing up for others, but the reality of the moment paralyzed him. His body screamed to move, but his mind built walls of fear higher than he could climb. "Someone else will step in," the second muttered, as if repeating it would make it true, but no one did. In the corner booth, a young mother pulled her daughter close. The little girl peeked over her mother's arm, her wide eyes fixed on the veteran. "Why is he hitting him, Mommy?" she whispered. The mother shushed her quickly. "Don't look, baby. Just eat your food." But the food sat untouched. The girl's innocent question pierced the silence deeper than any adult words could. Because how do you explain hatred to a child? How do you explain why a man who risked his life for strangers is treated like an inconvenience in his own country? The mother fought tears. She had grown up hearing her grandfather's war stories, tales of valor, sacrifice, brotherhood. To see an old soldier treated like this broke something inside her. But fear kept her rooted, arm wrapped tightly around her daughter, whispering prayers instead of raising her voice. And through it all, the veteran sat steady. His cheek still burned red from the slap, but he did not raise his hand to touch it. He did not bow his head. He kept his posture upright, his eyes fixed on the table as though he were studying the wood grain. But inside, his mind drifted back to the battlefield. He remembered nights in the jungle when silence meant survival, when even a whisper could draw fire, when waiting, still and patient, was the difference between life and death. He had mastered silence then, and now, decades later, he wielded it again, not for survival, but for dignity. The bully mistook that silence for weakness. But those who had seen war knew better. Silence is not always surrender. Sometimes it is strategy. Sometimes it is strength. The bully glanced around, smirk widening as he read the room's paralysis as victory. "That's what I thought," he said loudly, his voice dripping with smugness. "No one here has the guts to say a word? Because you all know I'm right. He's nothing but an old man, clinging to a past that doesn't matter anymore." His laugh was sharp, cruel, and it bounced off the walls like a whip crack, but beneath the surface, cracks were forming. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some clenched their jaws, others tightened their grips on silverware. The silence was not agreement. It was the storm before thunder. At the far end of the diner sat a man alone, maybe in his 50s. He had been quiet through it all, sipping his coffee, but his eyes now shimmered with tears, because he knew. He knew that veteran, not personally perhaps, but in spirit. His own father had been one. He remembered growing up with a man who carried the same quiet dignity, who never boasted about his service, who woke from nightmares no one else could understand. His father had died years earlier, but seeing this moment was like watching his memory slapped across the face. His heart ached, but his voice failed him. He whispered only to himself, "This isn't right. This isn't right." Cowardice spread like smoke. Each person in that diner told themselves the same lie. Someone else will do something. But no one did. And the weight of that inaction pressed down heavier than the bully's hand ever could. The veteran knew it too. He had seen it before, not just in diners, but in history. Inaction is often the loudest ally of injustice, and yet he sat there, composed, unshaken, because he carried something none of them could see. The unbreakable pride of a soldier who had faced worse than one man's cruelty. The bully leaned back finally, crossing his arms, smirk plastered on his face. He believed he had won. The room's silence, the old man's composure, the crowd's hesitation, it was all proof of his power. But arrogance is blind. The diner held its breath. Something was coming, not yet, but soon, because dignity, no matter how quiet, does not die in silence. It waits, and when it rises, it shakes the ground beneath arrogance. The silence of the diner should have been enough to end it. But for men like him, silence is gasoline, and arrogance is the match. The bully leaned against the booth, crossing his arms, letting the weight of his leather jacket exaggerate his size. His lips curled into a sneer, his voice dripping with venom as he threw his next words like daggers. "What's the matter, old man? Cat got your tongue? Where's all that soldier's courage they brag about in parades? Where's that pride you people carry like a badge? You can't even look me in the eye without shaking." He bent down closer, his breath hot and sour, his face inches from the veteran's. "You're nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing but a relic, rusted, forgotten, a broken piece of history nobody asked for." The veteran's eyes didn't waver. His silence wasn't empty. It was deliberate. His jaw was tight, his hands folded calmly on the table. He didn't flinch, didn't break, and that drove the bully mad, because men like him feed on reaction. They thrive when their cruelty sparks anger, fear, or tears. But when the victim doesn't give them that satisfaction, they spiral, desperate to claw deeper. The bully raised his voice, ensuring the entire diner could hear every syllable. "You think you're respected? You think anybody here cares about your little war stories? They're not clapping for you anymore, old man. Nobody sings your praises now. You're just another burden, another useless mouth this country has to feed." He smacked the veteran's cane where it leaned against the booth, making it clatter to the ground. "Look at this. Can't even stand on your own without a stick. And you expect me to respect you?" The cane rolled across the linoleum floor, stopping near the shoes of a young boy sitting with his parents. The child bent down, instinctively reaching for it, but his mother's hand caught his arm. "Don't," she whispered, her voice shaking. Fear silenced even kindness. Around the diner, people shifted uncomfortably. The two young men by the door clenched their fists tighter. The waitress bit her lip so hard it nearly bled. The man sipping coffee at the far booth set his cup down with a trembling hand. No one could meet the veteran's eyes, not because of shame directed at him, but because of the shame they felt in themselves. Watching, frozen, complicit, the bully saw it. He fed on it. He spread his arms wide, laughing. "See? Nobody cares enough to help you. You're alone. Even your so-called country doesn't care." In that moment, the veteran's mind drifted. He remembered nights overseas, lying on the dirt with gunfire cracking above, thinking he was alone. But he wasn't. Brothers had been beside him, breathing the same fear, whispering the same prayers. He remembered carrying a wounded friend across a field, bullets whipping past, smoke choking the air. His legs had almost given out, but his spirit had not. And now, sitting in this diner decades later, the silence around him felt familiar. The fear in these faces was not so different from the fear he'd seen in foxholes. The difference? Back then, fear united men. Here, fear divided them. Still his dignity held. He would not break. Not for this bully. Not for this crowd. Not for anyone. The bully pounded his chest, raising his voice further. "You all worship men like him. But look at him now. Weak, helpless, can't fight. Can't even stand. And you expect me to show respect? Respect is earned. And he's nothing but a washed-up soldier who couldn't even win his own life back." The words cut deep into the silence. Some diners gasped softly. Others shook their heads. But still, no one moved. The veteran's lips parted. His voice was soft, gravelly, weathered by age and experience. But it carried a weight the bully's shouting could never match. "I didn't fight for your respect." The bully blinked. Momentarily thrown, the veteran's eyes lifted, locking with his. "I fought so people like you could live in a country where you're free to be ungrateful, where you can spit on sacrifice and still sleep under the blanket of freedom others died to provide." His words weren't loud, but they carried like thunder through the diner. People shifted, eyes widening. The bully opened his mouth to retort, but for a heartbeat no words came. But arrogance is stubborn. He laughed again, harsher this time, trying to drown out the sting of those words. "Spare me the speeches, old man. That was then. This is now. Nobody cares what you did 50 years ago. We care about what you are now. And right now, you're nothing but a weak, lonely old man in a diner." He looked around, pointing at the silent crowd. "And look, they all agree with me. Nobody's standing up for you. Not one." The veteran didn't respond. His silence was louder than ever. A tension thicker than smoke filled the room. Some looked down at their plates, ashamed. Others stared at the veteran with tears threatening their eyes. They didn't know it yet, but this was the moment just before a storm breaks. The bully believed his dominance was complete, but arrogance blinds. The silence of the diner was no longer cowardice, it was anticipation, because something was about to shift, something or someone was about to walk through that door. The bully stood tall, chest heaving, drunk on the silence he mistook for victory. He smirked, scanning the room, daring someone to challenge him. No one did. The veteran remained still, his hands folded, his face calm despite the redness on his cheek. His composure only deepened the unease in the room. And then, the bell above the diner door jingled. It was a small sound, ordinary, almost delicate. But in that heavy silence, it rang like a church bell at midnight. Every head turned instinctively toward the entrance. A tall figure stepped inside. His posture was straight, his suit sharp, his stride steady and deliberate. He wasn't rushing, wasn't looking for attention, but somehow the air shifted the moment he crossed the threshold. He paused just inside the doorway, scanning the room. His eyes landed quickly on the scene, the bully looming over the veteran, the cane on the floor, the frozen crowd. And then his eyes softened when they found the old man at the booth. For the first time since the slap, the veteran smiled. Not broadly, not with joy, but with the quiet relief of a man who knew the storm had finally passed. because this was no stranger. This was his son. Whispers rippled through the diner like waves. "Who's that?" "Do you know him?" "Look at the way he walks. He doesn't look ordinary." Even the bully turned, momentarily caught off guard. His smirk faltered for just a heartbeat before returning. He scoffed, trying to mask his unease with laughter. "And who are you supposed to be? Another old fool come to save him?" But something in the newcomer's presence unsettled him, because the son didn't flinch. He didn't snarl. He didn't raise his voice. He just walked forward, each step measured, calm, unstoppable. The veteran straightened even more in his seat. His hand brushed the table, steady, purposeful. This was the moment he had been waiting for, not because he needed rescue, but because he knew dignity multiplies when witnessed. He had chosen silence not because he was weak, but because he trusted what was coming, and now that trust entered the room. The man in the suit reached the booth. He didn't look at the bully first. He looked at his father. "Dad," he said softly, his voice warm, steady. "Are you all right?" The veteran gave a small nod. "I'm fine." The simplicity of that exchange carried more weight than the bully's shouts. The bond between them was palpable. Respect, trust, history written in their eyes. Only then did the son turn to the bully. His expression was unreadable, calm, but his gaze was sharp enough to cut glass. "Did you put your hands on my father?" The diner held its breath. The bully laughed, louder than before, his voice echoing through the room. "Your father? This old man? Don't tell me you're related to him. What are you going to do about it? He's nothing, and if you're his son, that makes you nothing too." He puffed out his chest, trying to reassert dominance. But cracks had formed in his bravado. The steady confidence of the son unnerved him. Every pair of eyes locked on the confrontation. The waitress leaned forward, breath caught in her throat. The young men at the door sat straighter, anticipation in their eyes. Even the little girl in the corner peeked out from behind her mother's arm. Sensing something important was unfolding. The silence wasn't cowardice anymore, it was expectation. Everyone could feel it. This was the turning point. The son leaned slightly closer, his voice low, calm, controlled. "You made a mistake," the bully scoffed. "Oh yeah? And what mistake is that?" The son's eyes narrowed, but his tone never rose. "You thought he was alone." The words hung in the air like a blade suspended by a thread. The bully's smirk flickered. The crowd murmured. The veteran sat taller, pride glimmering in his eyes, because in that single sentence, his son had shifted the entire balance of power. The bully took a step back, then forward again, as if trying to reclaim ground he hadn't realized he'd lost. "You think I'm scared of you? I don't care who you are." But his voice wavered, just slightly, enough for the room to hear. The son didn't reply immediately. He let the silence work, the same silence his father had mastered minutes before. And in that silence, the bully's confidence eroded further. The veteran finally spoke again, his voice low but firm. "Son," he said, his eyes never leaving the bully's, "don't waste your anger. Men like him already carry their punishment inside them." The words were heavy, not just for the bully, but for everyone listening. Some diners shivered, goosebumps prickling their arms. Because there was truth in that statement, truth that struck harder than any slap could. The son nodded slightly, acknowledging his father's wisdom. But he also knew there was a lesson to be taught here, not just for the bully, but for everyone watching. The diner had transformed. Moments ago, it was a room of silence, fear, and shame. Now, it was a theater of reckoning. The father, silent yet dignified. The son, calm yet commanding. The bully, loud but shrinking. And the crowd, waiting, hanging on every word, every breath. Something was about to happen, something that would shock everyone in that room, because the bully still didn't know who he had laid hands on, or whose son had just walked through that door. And when that truth came, it wouldn't just silence him, it would break him. The bully squared his shoulders, trying to reclaim the space that seemed to shrink around him. He puffed out his chest, forcing a grin that was more mask than confidence. "So what? You walked in here with a fancy suit? Big deal. You think that makes you important? You think I care who you are? I don't. But the truth was, he did care. He cared more than he would admit. Because something in the son's presence unsettled him. The calm, the stillness, the way the crowd leaned forward, sensing gravity in this man that no swagger could match. The son's eyes didn't waver. He looked straight into the bully's, as if searching for something deeper than anger, something the bully didn't want anyone to see. "Do you even know who you put your hands on?" he asked softly. The bully laughed, loud and forced, his voice echoing in the diner. "Yeah, some washed-up old man who should have stayed home instead of sitting where he doesn't belong." The veteran's son tilted his head slightly, almost pitying him. "No, you didn't just slap an old man. You laid your hands on a soldier who gave more for this country than you could ever imagine. And worse than that, you insulted my father." The word father rang out like a gavel. The diner gasped in unison. "That's his son? Wait, his father? That old man? No wonder he walked in like that." The bully blinked, caught off guard. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. He took a half step back but tried to cover it with another laugh. "So what if he's your dad? That doesn't change anything. He's still weak. And so are you if you're defending him." The son didn't move. He simply straightened his jacket, his calmness louder than the bully's noise. Then the son spoke again. His voice was measured, his tone deliberate. "My name is Colonel James Carter, United States Army." The room froze. Gasps rippled through the diner. A fork clattered to the floor. The waitress covered her mouth with her hand. The young men by the door sat bolt upright. Colonel, not just a man in a suit. Not just a son, a decorated officer, a leader of men, a protector of freedom, carrying authority that stretched far beyond the walls of this small-town diner. The bully's smirk collapsed. His face drained of color. Colonel Carter didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "For years I have led soldiers into battles so men like you could live free. And every time, I carried with me the lessons my father taught me. Integrity, honor, respect." He leaned closer. His eyes locked on the bully's. "And today, you chose to insult the man who gave me those lessons. A man who carried a rifle before I ever wore a uniform. A man who bled so you could stand here and spit on his sacrifice." The bully's lips parted, but no sound came. The colonel didn't blink. "So before you open your mouth again, ask yourself, what have you ever given? What have you ever risked? What will anyone remember about you when you're gone? Because right now all they'll remember is that you slapped a veteran in a diner." The silence broke, not with words, but with emotion. The man in the corner booth who had whispered "this isn't right" earlier now had tears streaming down his face. The young mother clutched her daughter tighter, whispering softly, "That man is a hero, baby. Both of them are." Even the two young men by the door leaned forward, eyes blazing with admiration. They weren't just watching a confrontation anymore. They were watching a lesson unfold. The bully tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. "Colonel, huh? Doesn't mean anything in here. This is just a diner. Out there, maybe people salute you. In here, you're just another man." His words wavered. Everyone heard it. The once booming voice had cracks in it now, cracks born of fear. The colonel didn't flinch. "In here, I'm still his son, and that means more than any rank I'll ever wear." The veteran finally spoke, his voice quiet but powerful. "Respect is not about the walls you stand in. It's about the man you choose to be inside them." The words sank into the air like weights. Some in the crowd nodded, others wiped their eyes. For the first time, the bully seemed smaller. His shoulders slumped slightly, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an exit. The confidence he had worn like armor now cracked and fell away, leaving only a man exposed, fragile, humiliated. Colonel Carter stood firm, but he didn't raise a hand. He didn't need to. His presence alone was justice enough. "You thought he was weak," he said, nodding toward his father. "But look around you. Who's the weak one now?" The diner was silent, but this time it wasn't cowardice. It was agreement. The bully had been defeated without a single punch thrown, and now, I ask you, yes, you watching this unfold, would you still call him weak? Knowing who his son turned out to be, would you still see an old man in a booth? Or would you see the strength it takes to endure without breaking? Because sometimes the true power doesn't reveal itself until the right moment. Comment the word respect if you believe dignity is stronger than cruelty, and share this story so others remember. Never underestimate the quiet strength of a man who has already given everything. The diner felt different now. Moments ago, it was heavy with fear, thick with shame. Now it carried something else entirely, anticipation. The bully's arrogance had cracked. The sun's presence filled every corner of the room, pressing on the walls like invisible gravity. But this story wasn't finished. Not yet. Colonel Carter didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm was sharper than any shout. He stepped closer to the bully, closing the space between them. The air seemed to grow colder with every inch. "You slapped a man who stood for everything you've never understood," the colonel said, his eyes steady. "And you thought that made you powerful." The bully swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. The colonel leaned in, lowering his voice, making it intimate. "Personal. Power isn't in how hard you can hit. It's in what you choose not to hit. Power isn't measured by who you can hurt. It's measured by who you protect." The words hit harder than fists ever could. The bully's pride fought desperately to survive. He lifted his chin, forcing words out. "You don't know me. You think because you wear a uniform you're better than me. You think people respect you because of your title? Respect doesn't matter to me. Fear does. And right now, they all fear me." He gestured around the diner, his hand sweeping wide. But this time, nobody agreed. Nobody shrank back. The crowd's silence no longer felt like submission. It felt like judgment, and the bully felt it. The old man finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he reached down for his cane. The young boy who had wanted to pick it up earlier now slid it gently across the floor toward him. The veteran took it, gripping it firmly as he rose from his seat. The room gasped softly. The man they thought would remain seated, silent, beaten, now stood tall. His voice was steady, aged, but unbroken. "Son," he said, not to the colonel, but to the bully, "you mistake fear for respect. They are not the same. Fear fades the moment you leave the room. Respect follows a man even after he's gone." The words cut like glass. The bully's eyes darted, unable to hold the veteran's gaze. The colonel nodded, then turned back to the bully. "You wanted this room to fear you, but look around. They don't fear you. They pity you." Because a man who humiliates an elder, a man who mocks sacrifice, a man who raises his hand against someone who cannot fight back, that man has already declared his weakness to the world. He paused, letting the words sink in. "And here's the truth. You didn't expose my father's weakness. You exposed your own." The bully's breath came faster. His shoulders trembled, not from anger anymore, but from the crumbling of his own facade. For the first time, the silence broke. A voice came from the corner, the man who had whispered earlier. The one with tears in his eyes. "He's right." Then another voice. The waitress, her voice trembling but resolute. "You should be ashamed." The young men by the door stood up, fists clenched not in fear this time, but in solidarity. The bully turned, looking around the room, realizing the tide had turned against him. His power had evaporated. The silence he once commanded was gone. The veteran lifted his cane, not as a weapon, but as a symbol. He tapped it once on the floor, the sound echoing like a gavel. "I spent my life fighting men who believed cruelty was strength, and every one of them learned the same lesson. Hate always loses. Always." The bully flinched as though struck, though no hand had touched him. The colonel stepped even closer, his voice low enough that only the bully and those nearest could hear, yet strong enough to pierce the entire room. "Look at yourself. You're trembling, not because I threatened you, not because anyone here touched you. You're trembling because deep down, you know you're nothing like him, and that truth terrifies you." The bully's lips quivered. His fists, once so tight, now hung useless at his sides. His eyes darted, searching desperately for an escape. The colonel didn't move. "So I'll ask you one last question," he said. "When you leave this diner, what will you be remembered for? A man who slapped a veteran, or a man who finally learned what respect means?" The bully's chest heaved. His arrogance cracked completely, shattering under the weight of truth. His eyes flickered to the crowd, every face against him, every whisper condemning him. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His throat was dry, his pride swallowed. Finally, he lowered his gaze. For the first time, the bully was silent, the tension lifted, replaced by something new: relief, awe, reverence. The bully had been defeated without fists, without violence, defeated by dignity, by truth, by the bond between father and son. The crowd exhaled as one, as though they had all been holding their breath together. Some clapped softly, others simply nodded, but the atmosphere was different now, stronger, lighter. The bully turned, shuffling toward the door, his swagger gone, his shoulders slumped. Each step was a retreat, each glance a reminder of his humiliation, but the story wasn't over, because the true lesson hadn't yet been spoken. That was coming, and when it came, it would not just humble the bully, it would lift everyone else. The bully's steps toward the door were slow, unsteady. His once proud shoulders slumped. His leather jacket no longer armor but a costume stripped of meaning. The smirk that had ruled his face was gone. In its place was silence, his own silence, heavy and humiliating. The diner watched him go. Every eye followed him, not out of fear anymore, but out of something sharper: judgment. A few heads shook. Others looked away, unwilling to grant him the dignity of acknowledgement. The bell above the door jingled as he left, the same bell that had announced the son's entrance. But this time it didn't sound delicate. It sounded final. The air changed immediately. Where there had been tension, there was release. Where there had been fear, there was relief. And where there had been shame, there was now pride. Pride in the man who had endured, and in the son who had stood beside him. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, not in chaos, but in applause. Slow at first, a ripple of hands clapping tentatively, then stronger, louder, unified. The waitress who had frozen earlier now clapped with tears streaming down her cheeks. The two young men at the door slapped their hands together, their earlier hesitation transformed into admiration. The mother in the corner hugged her daughter, whispering, "This is what strength really looks like." "Baby," and the little girl, eyes wide, clapped too, her small hands adding to the chorus. The veteran stood tall, cane in hand, his cheek still marked by the slap, but his dignity shining brighter than any wound. The colonel stood at his side, eyes steady, shoulders squared, his presence unshakable. The old man raised his hand gently, signaling for the applause to quiet. Slowly it did. The room waited, every soul leaning forward, ready to hear his words. His voice was low, gravelly, but every syllable carried weight. "I've lived long enough to know this world can be cruel. I've seen battles, I've seen loss, I've seen men broken, but I've also seen courage. I've seen sacrifice. I've seen respect." He looked around the room, his eyes meeting faces one by one. Today, you all saw a man try to take dignity away with his hand. But dignity isn't something you can slap off a face. It lives here. He tapped his chest just above his heart. And no one can take it unless you give it. The room was silent, listening, holding on to every word. I didn't fight wars so people would clap for me. I fought so children could laugh freely, so families could eat in peace, so even men like him could live without fear of chains or dictators. I fought so you could have the choice, to stand up or to sit down. And today I sat, not because I was weak, but because sometimes silence teaches louder than shouting. The colonel stepped forward, his eyes sweeping across the diner. My father is right. Respect isn't about titles or medals or uniforms. It's about how you treat people when nobody's watching. It's about how you carry yourself when the easy choice is cruelty and the hard choice is compassion. He looked at the young men by the door. Courage doesn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it means holding your ground without throwing a punch. He turned to the waitress. Sometimes it means speaking truth when your voice shakes. Finally, he looked at the little girl. His voice softened. And sometimes it means remembering that strength is not in hurting others, but in protecting them. The girl smiled shyly, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. The veteran tapped his cane once more against the floor. That man thought he humiliated me today. But in truth, he exposed himself. He showed the world what weakness looks like when it pretends to be strong. And I leave here with my head high, because my dignity does not depend on the respect of fools. The words hung in the air like scripture, etched into the hearts of everyone who heard them. The bully may have walked out, but the lesson stayed behind. And now, my friend, I turn to you, the one watching, listening, walking through this story with us. When you see injustice, what will you do? Will you be the silent crowd, frozen by fear, waiting for someone else to stand? Or will you be the voice that breaks the silence? When you see arrogance mocking dignity, will you turn away? Or will you remember this moment? An old man, a veteran standing tall despite cruelty. His son walking through the door to remind the world that respect never dies. Because the truth is this, bullies will always exist. Arrogance will always try to shout, but dignity, true dignity, never fades. It waits, it endures. And when the right moment comes, it rises. If this story moved you, share it now. Write the word honor in the comments to show that you stand with those who carried more than their share, who fought battles you'll never see, who endured pain so you could live free. And don't forget, subscribe for more stories like this, because these aren't just stories. They are reminders. Reminders that respect is earned not by fists, but by character. And sometimes the quietest man in the room carries the loudest legacy. The diner returned to its rhythm slowly, but no one left the same as they had entered. Coffee was poured, plates refilled, conversations resumed, but under it all lingered something new. A memory, a lesson. The veteran sat back down, his son beside him, their presence a monument more powerful than any statue could ever be. And as the little girl whispered to her mother, loud enough for the closest tables to hear, her words carried the weight of the entire room. "Mommy, when I grow up, I want to be strong like him." The mother smiled through her tears. "Then remember, baby, real strength isn't in the hand that strikes. It's in the heart that endures." The story closed there, not with violence, not with revenge, but with something greater. Truth, because in the end, the bully was forgotten. But the lesson lived on.